Welcome to the Pivoting Wolf. Open conversations with interesting people from varying backgrounds across several different countries around the world. Hello, everyone. This is Rhonda Harris from White Wolf Consulting, and this is episode 5 of the Pivoting Wolf. Today, we're speaking with Dr. Via Chiga, retired professor from Boise State University from Boise, Idaho. And I affectionately call him Dr. V. So Dr. V, how are you today? Welcome.
I'm doing well, and I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
I'm really excited for you to be here too, because I'm just going to go ahead and share with everyone that, we do know each other from graduate school for me. And, I always say I learned from the best, and you were definitely one of them. So thank you for my experience at Boise State. And I'm so glad that we've stayed in touch over the years. And more specifically, talking about this particular project recently, conversations that we've had a few months ago when I was telling you that I had an idea that I wanted to kind of be a voice for people who are in midlife and, changing careers or any of the other things that happen during this specific period of time. And so I want to give you some credit and thank you for encouraging me to go ahead and move forward with this idea, because I wasn't really 100% sure, like, do I really want to do that? And so it's been fun and it's been interesting, and we've gotten some good feedback so far. So I can't wait for us to dig in and talk to you and let you share your pivotal moments and your experience in midlife. So I just want to basically give a quick background about you. You had consulted and worked in business, government, and nonprofit settings for more than 40 years, you said. And I think, was that prior to you coming to Boise State?
Yes, I was a performance consultant for 20 years before coming to Boise State in 2007.
Okay. And I'm certainly proud of the department at Boise State. The organizational performance and workplace learning. Of course, it was called something different when I was there, but nonetheless, it's still the same great program. And now you have recently retired. Wasn't it this spring? Was it?
This May.
Right. But you're still involved with the process management lab. And I know that's near and dear to your heart. So do you mind just finishing out, a bit about yourself and share with us, more about the PML?
Yeah. Some colleagues and I started the process management lab a couple of years ago, just before COVID. And what we wanted to do was to provide a mechanism for nonprofit organizations to grow their capacity by improving their internal processes in ways that help them better meet their missions and serve their communities. To that end, we started working together with graduates and graduate students from our department to provide process improvement workshops, where we work with these clients to help them identify and improve processes that are central to their organization. We started this just before COVID, and our first approach was the traditional approach, where we met at client facilities in meeting rooms with great big whiteboards, and we showed up with little sticky notes and neat little Sharpies and little labels people could pin on things. And then came COVID. And suddenly we had to figure out a new way to do this process improvement work. And we spent the summer conducting a trade study looking at different ways of doing our process improvement workshops remotely. And we finally settled on a combination of Zoom and a whiteboard software called Mural. And we've been using those since very successfully.
So can you talk about, were there, what was it like to transition from, the traditional way to the new way? Did you have any sticking points? What kind of things that you experienced in doing that?
Uh, the sticky points were, the quick realization that we couldn't be doing this in person, and that with the pandemic, our client at the time, the Idaho Food Bank, had already been facing increased pressure to provide food for hungry neighbors throughout the state, because Idaho is one of the fastest growing states in the US.
Oh, okay.
COVID added more pressure. And so they were really keen to work with us. And we knew that we had to come up with an approach that would work. Now, the good news is that some of this problem space had been simplified for us. Boise State uses Zoom, and Zoom also lets us record the workshops. And so
Okay.
the use of Zoom was a given, because we needed
Okay.
to do this remotely. What wasn't the given is how we represent processes, and we represent, what people do on the job using a flow chart. And the flow chart traces their activities and shows their decisions. And the question became, what software do we use for that? And there are about 5 different ones out there. And so we set and thought through our process for facilitating those workshops and the features that we need. And then we looked at each one of these 5 softwares and thought, to what extent does it meet the needs? And then we picked one of them and did some prototyping work, where we represented the process of making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And then represented the process for what would happen if, instead of being a person at home making a PBJ for yourself or the kids, you were a church group making 150 of them for a social event. And using that prototype, we were able to settle on Mural because it handled the process mapping and our facilitation in the best possible manner.
Okay, so it sounds like even though there were some initial challenges that COVID presented, that the actual adoption of this new approach it sounds like it went relatively smoothly once you figured out what additional software to use. Okay, well, that's great. So I'm going to come back to this lab because I know it's near and dear to your heart, but I want to touch on something else first and then tie back to that. You answered some questions in a pre-interview questionnaire that I sent out to everybody. And I asked you to kind of, share a little bit about your pivot experience. And I was rather touched by your answer. You talked about both of your parents, once they retired, that they lost most of their social network within about 5 years or so. And you said that before they passed away, they spent a lot of time being alone and lonely. So I wanted to, ask you to kind of share a little bit about that and what kind of an impact that made on you emotionally or otherwise.
It was hard. Both my parents retired, and it wasn't a long time afterwards that the friends that they had started drifting as different things happened to them. My dad had been living and working in Texas and moved to Washington State in the Redmond area to be closer to my brother. My mom had been, before that, he'd lived in Dallas and had been a biochemist, a biophysicist working on laser applications in medicine. My mom had been working in the University of Colorado registrar's office for a long time and really liked that job. But she'd reached retirement age, and there was an incoming boss that she didn't get along well with. And according to her, other people in the office did not get along with this person either. But she opted to retire as soon as she could. And both of them quickly lost a lot of the social contacts that came out of work. And I think they also lost a lot of the other things that valued work gives us, that sense of belonging, that ability to interact with others, that notion of facing challenges that are worth facing, coming up with new ways of dealing with new things as they arise, the satisfaction of completing something, the joy of working with others, the joy of making new friends, the accomplishment of overcoming something that was new and different. My dad, to some extent, fared a little bit better because he really liked geology. He was a rock hound. And, in collecting mineral samples and being part of mineral clubs, first in Washington and then later in Flagstaff, Arizona, where he moved, he was able to have some contact with people. And, he was the resident Ask Mel. And when they, somebody at a rock show had a question about what is this or how does this form or whatever, Mel, my dad, did the Ask Mel thing, and he started blogging.
Oh, really? Okay.
And so that was good. But, if you look at what he was doing, on a daily basis, every now and then he was interacting with other people. But as his health became more fragile, that tapered off. The other thing that happened to both is that they were plagued with arthritis, spinal stenosis. Their backs really hurt. My dad also had problems with his neck. My mom also had problems with one of her knees. And they became more and more sedentary. And as they became more sedentary and more alone, I think it confounded in ways that worsened their health. And, the notion of becoming them if I didn't change my life was really scary. On top of that, my mom passed away from Alzheimer's, and her father, my grandfather, also passed away. There's a line of thought that thinks Alzheimer's is hereditary. So one of the things I realized is that if I wanted to do my best to try to avoid that, I needed to make changes in terms of, being able to socialize and not be lonely and doing things that I think are of value, but also doing things that were physical that can stave off, hopefully, the arthritis, the loss of strength, the sedentary effects, and maybe even keep me from getting Alzheimer's.
So I want to just stop and just say, wow, that's a lot. And, I can sense that the difficulty of witnessing what happened to your parents. And, that's an unfortunate common theme for people who are at this phase in their life. And so, that's come up a lot in some of the conversations that I've had. But one of the other really super important things that you talked about and articulated very clearly is the value and the benefit of work. And I think that that's the way that you put it, as you went down this list of things, I was like, oh, I didn't think of it that way. Yeah, that's a good point. I've been working from home for years anyway, and I'm a bit of an introvert, so those things don't really resonate with me, but I absolutely appreciate the value of the social aspect of work. I have other ways to socialize, clearly. And, I'm just wired a little bit differently for the things that I appreciate. But that being said, I do have to recognize that, when I don't have the social connection or some kind of an outlet in other areas of my life, although I'm not getting that from the work side of my life, not in the same way that someone who actually, for example, goes into an office or engages with the same group of people on a regular basis. I'm not saying that you have to be physically in an office to be able to benefit from those social aspects that you talked about.
Mhm.
because clearly I've got, um, I've had experiences where, we're all working remotely, but we still have a group of people, right? I wanted to point this out because I think that at some points in one's career, there can often be this feeling of, wanting to race to the end. I can't wait until I can retire, and I'm going to get the sports car, and I'm going to travel. I'm going to backpack around the world, whatever.
Mhm.
But I think some of the things that we have to consider, and you touched on that as well, is how long before you can retire. How long do we have to keep working for financial reasons? And when we get there, what's the physical capability going to be? The degree to which we're going to be able to do that backpacking trip, and so it's not to sound so cliche, but this is one of the reasons why I feel so strongly as I do about making sure that we take advantage of the moment when we can, because when you get to this point in life, which I'm like about, I don't know, 3 weeks out from being 55, and I feel mentally, I still feel very youthful, and I've got a great mindset, outlook and all that, but man, it's not the same, physically, it's just not the same. It's just a reality. And I think that, that is worth noting, and that could never be overstated, the critical importance of taking care of one's health physically and mentally. Because what I heard you say is, your mom didn't fare as well as your dad after retirement. It sounds like she probably had less social interaction than he did. And if she already was prone, was it your mom that had Alzheimer's? It was your
Yes,
dad.
my
So
mom.
if that was hereditary, that certainly doesn't help the situation,
Mhm.
and I can sense why working on this project with the lab is so near and dear to you, not only because it's important to you in and of itself because of the work that you're doing, but it serves that purpose to keep you busy, because how watching your parents go through their experience impacted you, and so it makes you aware of your own situation and the need to kind of be proactive and make sure that that doesn't happen to you. So thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that. Anything
I
else you
think
wanted
there,
to comment about this?
yeah,
That Mhm.
I think there are engineering aspects to this. If we accept responsibility for how we're going to live our lives, part of that is, well, what are we going to do and how are we going to do it?
Mhm.
And so, with my own retirement looming, I realized that I wanted something different. I wanted to engineer something better. And so, on the social side, the process management lab is a way to continue with, people. I love doing things worth doing while continuing to meet new people and challenges. If you get to work with people you love, doing the things that you love, and it's worthwhile, I think you're about as close to heaven that you can get on this side.
Mhm.
On the physical side, I've been working with personal trainers. I know it doesn't look like it, but since about 2013.
Mhm.
And over the last several years, I've increased my presence in the gym to the point where I'm able to do new things, and I relish in learning how to dribble a basketball, shoot a basket, play pickleball, lift weights.
Mhm.
Um, and so I am, stronger than I used to be. I'm losing the weight I need to lose.
Mhm.
Uh, and it feels good to have both of these progress in both of these areas. And so I get to wander around kind of giggling at how happy I am and how well things are working, and hopefully they continue.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. I love hearing that, because I I read an article, and I'm not sure if I shared this with you. It was an article that someone sent me a few months back, or right around the last time that we spoke. And well, you know who sent it to me was Angie. You know Angie with the red hair? Yeah. And it was talking about people who are unretiring and the reasons why. Because, you know, it's like, oh, I can't wait to retire. Like I was just talking about a few moments ago, and then you get there and it's not at all what they probably had perceived in their mind. You know, this time that you have on your hands. And I have a friend in the UK, and he's quite funny. I brought him up on another interview too, because he put it in such a dry British humor kind of way. It just made me laugh. He said, oh, you know, this time between you know, retirement and you know, when you're, you know, out of here. And he might have actually been speaking in terms of like when his children left the home, and his wife and he were sitting there like, what do we do now? Because their identity is like all messed up now, you know. And he referred to it as an inconvenient bit of time, you know. And I was like, that's so funny to hear that perspective, like an inconvenient bit of time versus I can't wait to get there because I'm going to do all these things. I'm going to have all the times to do, you know. And Tim Ferriss writes about this in his book, The 4-Hour Work Week. You know, he lamented about how sad it is to spend so much of your life, you know, your best years, if you will, working, and you know, you delay gratification to an extreme, you know, to then you get to retirement. Oh, now you get the red shiny car. Now you get to go on the trips. Really? Like that's bunk, you know. He just like totally rejected that whole concept. And you know, I don't know if you know who Tim Ferriss is, but I'll share some more about him with you later. But he just is, you know, definitely an unconventional guy, you know. So I really liked his approach because it speaks to, you know, I think it's unfortunate to have that mindset that you're going to delay your joy in your life until retirement. So I'm glad to hear that your retirement is going well, but I want to just share, you know, for the people who are watching this video, you know, to be mindful in the moment, because you may not have, you know, Dr. Villachicca's version of, you know, but it sounds like, and I like the word that you chose, engineering, because that speaks with such purpose and deliberate intention, right? And so maybe I would say if I had to pull like a key phrase away from your messaging so far is, I think we should all deliberately engineer a solution for ourselves and prepare for that, you know, as we approach, even whether we're on the verge of retirement, even if we're not there yet. You know, I'm definitely soaking in what you're saying. It seems obvious, but you could never be reminded too many times that this is really important to take charge of that. And, you know, something that was a bit of an unfortunate situation that you had to witness with the way your parents kind of turned into a motivation for you to take action and engineer something better for yourself. So thank you for sharing that.
I think it's also important to realize that we have a lot of myths around different parts of our lives. And there are a lot of myths around retirement. And so the great, you know, travel myth, you know, I really never traveled before, but suddenly I'm going to start traveling. I've never really had a sports car, but suddenly now I'm going to have one and I'm going to drive it all the time. I think, you know, there may be tidbits in there that could be a fun part of retirement, but hopefully retirement's going to last a long time, and you can only travel for so much, I think, before you want to get home. You can only drive your sports car so much. What will you be doing with the huge amount of time that will be on your hands, and how are you going to spend that, and how can you spend that in a way that's fulfilling, hopefully in a way that helps others rise. at least to me, that was important. Hopefully in a way that's fun, hopefully in a way that provides new challenges. You know, for me, there's a big good karma element about this.
Mhm.
I grew up poor, and it's really nice helping food banks feed hungry neighbors. Grew up when my mom remarried in a very abusive home. And it's
Mhm.
really nice helping mental health organizations.
Mhm.
And there seems to be a really nice karmic equilibrium going on in terms of the things that helped me in youth and the things I'm able to help out now in retirement. It's almost a circle kind of thing.
I think that's really beautiful, and I really want to point out the importance of that, and contrast that against the stereotypical, like you were saying, the sports car travel around the world concept, because I think that it kind of opens the conversation for people who may not necessarily think that way. And I have been meeting more and more people who are moving away from so much consumerism and materialism, and and they wouldn't hardly ever be interested in that type of a stereotype, experience for their retirement. So I think it's important that you've really shared the detail and why that's so important for you, to be able to give back. And thank you for sharing, your past experience and why that is, particularly relevant for you, given your childhood circumstances. So I think it's great to offer up a different narrative for people to consider, rather than the stuff that society kind of tells us what we're supposed to want and think and buy and do. It's like there's a definitely a more humanitarian and charitable way to spend our time, because whether it's an inconvenient bit of time for one person or it's a long lasting block of time for another, it's always good, in my humble opinion, to be able to give back and contribute to the good in the world.
I also think that these are very personal issues, and what's happiness for me is not going to be happiness for somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
I had a dear mentor who was a former chief petty officer with the Navy, and after retiring, he ran radio shops for the city of Aurora, Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
And I met him playing pool, and we were friends for over 20 years until he passed away. And he had a long commute, about 150 miles every day, and he did it every day, driving from where we lived in northern Colorado down to Aurora, Colorado, which is a suburb of Denver. And that's a lot of driving. And one day he came back and made a left-hand turn near his home and got T-boned and broke his ribs. And he called that his sign from God. And within a year, he had retired. And when he retired, he realized that his technical skills were really in demand. And he really wrestled with, what do I want to do in retirement? Because he could have easily done consulting work and was in demand as a consultant.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was really tempted by the idea of, I could keep doing something I'm good at. I can keep doing something that would bring in more money than I'd otherwise had. But finally, he decided, I joined the Navy when I was still a kid. I spent a whole career in the Navy serving our country. In retirement, I spent another career working for the city. I'm tired, I'm going fishing. And essentially, that's what he did. He played pool. We'd go fishing together a lot. we'd, get together at coffee, a coffee shop and talk, but
Mhm.
he was really happy doing that. And so, what was his ideal retirement is very different from mine. I still would have time to go fishing with him
Yeah.
in mine, and I do it at the drop of a hat. I miss JD very, very dearly.
Mhm.
But it's interesting. I think it's important to note that these are highly, these are some of the most personal decisions someone can make,
Mhm.
and people can make with their significant others.
Mhm.
My wife has is older than I, and she when I first came to Boise State, she thought she'd retire. And within
Mhm.
3 months, she said, I don't like this. And she started adjunct teaching at a local community college. And she has done that consistently since then and has no plans to stop. And
Mhm.
that's something that brings her joy and something that brings her worth.
Well, I think that's great that she was able to, recognize that that wasn't for her. Again, you are right. It is highly personal, and I think it is worth noting again another aspect of the narrative. And I guess I'll let me reveal something. So I've been studying some research lately around ageism in the workplace and things of that nature. And I just have been talking to people, and I'm hearing more people make comments, and they're beginning to question, whether they're experiencing that or not, because of their age. I'm not here to say whether they are or not. I'm just saying it's conversations that have been coming up more and more lately because my colleagues are aging along with myself, right? So I try to remain positive, and I say, well, the best way for you to combat that is to, keep your skills fresh and, remain relevant, et cetera, et cetera. So again, that's another narrative that I like to explore and look at. So there's always somebody out there telling you what you should do at this age, or you shouldn't do at this age, or when you retire, you should this or you should that, So I just like the variety of perspectives that you're presenting. You want, around retirement. And the reason why I tied that to the ageism in the workplace conversations that have been happening, it's because I think that too is driven by a narrative, and so your wife thought about retiring, but she was able to go back into work, into the workplace. So I'm glad that she was welcomed with that. And, and I'm not saying that she didn't face any obstacle. I don't know what her experience was,
Mhm.
but I just wanted to, throw that out there because forget the narrative, whether it's about retirement, whether it's about you're an older person still hanging in there in the workplace, or you're re-entering the workplace, in this particular phase in life, since, this is about the midlife, distinct, unique experiences. I just wanted to add that on because I think it's really relevant to talk about keeping things personal in a way. These are personal decisions. And, just as it's a personal decision to decide what to do with your retirement bit of time, likewise, if you decide to go back into the workplace, do that as well. And don't feel any guilt about it, or like you have to justify or ask for permission or explain anything to anybody, because I have heard whispers of conversations around the idea, oh, when you retire, basically whoosh, you're written off, and like, why would you want to go back to work? Why would you, and so that's why I think it's also so enriching to hear about all of the things that you listed, the benefits of work, the social aspects, the mental, clarity, and it keeps you sharp, it keeps you relevant. There's so much more to work than just getting a paycheck, so it's just
Well,
all related to me. And I just wanted to share that. I'm so glad that you're sharing these different perspectives. So thank you for that.
yeah, in the process management lab, we're doing this through the auspices of Boise State University. We offer our services at amazingly low rates because otherwise nonprofit organizations wouldn't be able to afford this.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is not about making money. This is about being able to work in the lab in ways that help nonprofit organizations, in ways that help their communities.
Right.
And so this is more a good karma
Mm-hmm.
effort than it is about some of the aspects of non-retired work where you literally have to be working in order to make a living.
Mm-hmm.
I'm retired now. That's set up, and
Mm-hmm.
that's not my worry.
Right.
Now my worry is how to make use of this relatively large, otherwise inconvenient bit of time. And
Right.
this was the solution that seems to be working for me now.
Mm-hmm. So on that bit about this block of time, when asked the question, what does the term midlife mean to you? You answered and said, I'm still exploring answers to this question. You said, I feel retirement may be placing me at the cusp of midlife and old age. Do you have any thoughts? What are your thoughts around when you talk about what I guess I consider the next phase, old age? What are you thinking about old age? What does that look like for you? If
Don't know.
you had it your way.
It it was interesting. I was a consultant for almost 20 years and then came to Boise State. And as soon as I came to Boise State, I got my first AARP card. Welcome, you've turned 50. I never really thought about getting older before. And I was really lucky to be able to make a huge career transition just shy of my 50th birthday.
Mhm.
And as I look to getting older, I'm not sure what that means. It means I'm going to do my best to, keep, being part of a happy and healthy social network. I'm going to do my best to keep my physical and my mental health, my cognitive functions.
Mhm.
My idea of the ideal old age is a researcher named Donald Hebb. And so if you go back to the height of behaviorism and B.F. Skinner,
Mhm.
Donald Hebb got in trouble with Skinner because Hebb said that there has to be a neuronal basis of learning. Something has to be going on in the brain. And Skinner didn't really care what was going on in the brain. He once quipped, whatever's happening in the brain is epiphenomenal. It's not something worth knowing or understanding. And Hebb posited otherwise. He said something has to be going on in the brain, and he thought it was about growing neural connections.
Okay.
Well, you fast forward from the 50s to the 80s, 90s, and a Nobel laureate named Eric Kandel found a neuronal basis of learning by using classical conditioning in sea slugs. And he was able to show neurons growing as the sea slugs made a connection between a stimulus and a response. And so Hebb found what Skinner ignored. And later on, researchers named a certain kind of neuron formation in the human brain after Donald Hebb. I tell this story because one reason that started me thinking about how to engineer retirement occurred years and years ago when I saw a documentary about Donald Hebb. And here's this old guy running around a university in Montreal. I think he was at McGill.
Mhm.
He may have been at Concordia. I should know, and I don't. But here's this little dapper old guy who's still smiling really broadly, who's still pursuing research and working with students and graduates he really likes. And he was pretty much able to do that until, the day he was no longer able to.
Mhm.
And I thought, that looks like a pretty good idea. Maybe I can pull that off. And that was probably the first inclination into, realizing that I needed to start thinking about what that block of time would be, and wanting, if I'm lucky, to be able to, pull off my own Donald Hebb.
So that's fascinating. Can you spell his last name, please?
Hebb.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't sure. So that is so interesting. I'm glad that you shared that piece, and that, of course, that makes me want to know, what do you think, and maybe you know this based on the research that you've done, what are some things that we might be able to do to actually take advantage of this Donald Hebb's approach
Well,
to start, create new, neural relationships? I mean,
well, there's all sorts of other research that's gone on, and one of the cool things that has come out in this 21st century is the realization that the brain is a lot more plastic than we used to think. When I was going to graduate school, we basically thought that your brain formation is largely, finished in youth. And once it's in place, it's relatively static and it stays in place until it kind of deteriorates. And if anything bad happens to it, there's no recovery. The nice thing is that we have all sorts of evidence now that that's not the case. The brain continues learning. And so our treatment for stroke victims is dramatically different. So the first thing that's happening now is they're getting stroke victims into therapy, and they're doing it very quickly with the idea of the faster you're in therapy, the easier it's going to be to regrow and reconnect neurons in ways that are helpful. I think it's in the realization that the continued realization that learning is lifelong. Because I'm a retired university faculty person, no, I think more because I'm retired. I'm part of a group at Boise State called the Osher Institute, which is a US-wide organization. But essentially, they bring lecturers and workshops in who talk about the things that interest them. So yesterday, I was at a lecture from a former Boise State professor who was part of a group of people that worked with the first graduate students in Vietnam to receive MBA degrees, and many of whom now are PhDs and in leadership positions throughout the country. I've attended lectures on by a British researcher who's working at Oklahoma on the transatlantic slave trade, and read his book on a story about 5 freeborn African-American kids who were kidnapped from Philadelphia, taken down to the Deep South, and retrieved and brought back. I sat in a lovely lecture on what's going on in Russia by an ex-Russian and so, we can learn new things, and we can keep learning throughout our life. And, for me, coming out of this academic thing, I'm comfortable with lectures and comfortable with workshops, but I'm reading, and I'm choosing to do things I wouldn't otherwise do. I'm not a handy person. My only useful skill outside of what I've done for a living is cooking. I can't do pretty much anything around a house. My wife recently bought me a new Traeger grill, and I used the miracle of YouTube, and I set the darn thing up. That's something I would have never tried to do before. I would have paid someone else to do that. So I think the human brain is a marvelous thing, and we can keep learning. I think our hearts are marvelous things, and we can keep caring, and we can keep trying and doing things. And so I think there are ways to try to keep our heads and our hearts forever young. I don't think they are things that are necessarily age determined. I think the only part of age and all of that is hopefully we're a lot smarter now than when we were younger.
I love that message. That really touches me. I love what you said. Our heads and our hearts can stay young. And it's, it's a cliche because people say that, forever young, or you're young at heart, but it's really, really true. And you've provided evidence to that, thank you, Dr. Hepp. So,
Thank you, Donald Hepp. Yes.
And I, as I was listening to you, it sounds lovely to be able to go to lectures and talks and things of that. And this is the part where, oh, well, you're so busy working and being immersed in the moment. It's a reminder to be mindful, to take time out to nourish your brain. And, and I like how you added the heart part into it too. I think that it's important for us to find ways to nourish our heart and be more deliberate about caring, and really be intentional about being empathetic and building. I want to add to this, to Donald Hepp's research, and I want to throw in here, I would like to posit that there's a way to increase emotional intelligence. And I think it's absolutely necessary, especially when we're seeing what's going on in the world today. And so I would imagine a combination of doing things to keep the brain functioning and at the high level, and keeping it challenged, because I know that's what it takes. It's like a muscle, you have to exercise that. And we know this because this is not new information. I will tell you though, I'm taking Dutch lessons right now.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it is cool, actually. And let me tell you something really weird, Dr. V. So Dutch is something else, okay? I took French in high school and college, but unfortunately, living in Georgia, I didn't have a lot of people around me to speak French with. So I kind of lost it a bit. I did do a few intentional things. When Jordan was young, I put her in a Saturday French school, École du Samedi, and she didn't like it. She's like, that's your dream, Mom. I'm not interested in French, but I wanted her to have that experience. And then I joined Alliance Française because I was just determined years ago, I was determined that I wanted to move to Europe, but my country of choice back then was France. I was obsessed with France. But now that I'm taking Dutch, I don't know why this is happening, but as I'm trying to speak Dutch, the French just woke up and decided to show its face again. Mm-hmm. And I happen to recently have a private tutor that I hired to have I worked with her for a month leading up to the current official class that I'm taking, because I had taken Dutch previously, but of course, COVID happened. And, for a lot of different reasons, I wasn't able to see it through, but I didn't want to start at ground zero. So I was kind of in between. I was like, well, I'm too far along to start completely over, but I'm not quite there yet for the next level. But I signed up for the next level class. I wanted to bridge that gap over the summer. So I worked with her for about a month, and it started coming back. The Dutch that I did learn previously started coming back. But she's also a French teacher as well. So she's fluent in French, Dutch, English, and probably some other things too. Mm-hmm. And we would be having our class, and she would say something, and I'd say blah, 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 and I would just blurt it out in French, just totally involuntarily. And I'm like, why is my brain doing that? So something's going on up there. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, and now that I'm taking the Dutch class now, and it keeps happening, and I just so happen to have a study buddy in class who coincidentally is French, and she has this strong French accent. And when we're trying to study Dutch together, the French starts spilling out, and so we're correcting each other, and then and I'm like, why? What is that? So it's fascinating how the brain works. So it's like something triggered that, and I think that if you are intentional and you exercise at it, like you talked about going to the gym,
Mhm.
I believe that there's such a thing as, like, there's a mental gym that we could, create for ourselves. I've read that, doing puzzles and math problems, and of course, learning a new language is one of those things on the list to kind of keep the brain active and whatnot. So, I just think it's interesting to just really call that out. I'm going to
Well,
look
and
up.
there's nothing like immersion for language learning. It's one thing to think about, how US students learn language in junior and high school in
Mhm,
a traditional classroom environment.
mhm,
It's another to think about people learning language using Duolingo or what's the other one, Babbel,
mhm,
using learning software.
mhm.
But if you really want to get language and you want to do it quickly, you go to the place where you have to speak the language, and your ability to do the things you want is going to be determined by the extent to which you can communicate. Um,
Yeah.
I took Spanish throughout high school, and I'm really bad because I don't practice it. But I know when my family was going down to Mexico and living with other families while my wife was teaching English there, my
Mhm,
Spanish greatly improved because the
mhm,
family we were staying with, only the father spoke English, and he was away at work during the
mhm,
day.
yeah.
And the good news is I like cooking even then. And, you know, that's how I practiced the Spanish. And knowing that no one was speaking English, made me practice my Spanish more. And I made even more mistakes. But,
Right.
people generally are native speakers are very forgiving of things like that and are more
Mhm,
than willing to help. Uh,
right.
but I think as, a tutoring situation is far more immersive than, the traditional kind of class study or the software study way. And my guess is that kind of immersion is growing new neural networks and connecting them with other ones that may not have been used for a while.
That's gotta be it. And interestingly, there's a place here in the Netherlands, and I'm not even going to try to attempt to remember the name, but and you could probably Google it, Dutch immersion, language school, and nuns. So there's an
Mhm.
old, I guess that's a monastery. And I don't even remember the town in the Netherlands, but it goes way back. It's quite old. And the Sisters of the something something order, something something, right? And so you can go there and live there for how, I don't know if it's 2 weeks or however long it is, and learn from the nuns, right? I'm not sure if they actually still have actual nuns that actually teach, but that's the history of the place. And I just thought, wow, how interesting is that? That you're isolated in this place, and you go and you learn Dutch, and that's that. And there's a place in France that I had discovered years ago that I always wanted to go do, in a castle somewhere in middle of who knows where, France. Same thing, immersion. You're there for like 3 weeks, and it's do or die. It's
Yeah,
like you're in
no
the
one's
middle of
speaking
nowhere.
English.
Yeah, you're in the middle of nowhere, France. You want to have dinner tonight? You better learn how to parlez-vous français, or you're not going to be no manger pour vous tonight. That's
Exactly.
my little hillbilly French. But Yeah, I think you're right. So it's interesting because we don't, I didn't think of it that way, but now that you specifically mentioned this work of Dr. Hebb, I'm going to look that up because, I'm actually fascinated by that now. And I think that's just, put an interesting twist on the conversation, because if you want to combat, Alzheimer's, like you said, I think that is definitely one way to do it. And not to get off on a whole nother tear, but I've been following the research around insulin resistance and stuff. And I've got family members who have diabetes, and I don't have it and I don't want it. So I've adjusted my nutritional plan and whatnot. And in doing the research, I learned that they are now considering Alzheimer's to be diabetes 3. And like, there's the whole science behind all of that, which I know we don't have time to get into tonight, but, I'm just going to say that, as we, start to wrap up here, the mental gym, the physical gym,
And your emotional gym.
And your emotional gym. Yes, that as well. So before we end, one last question. I asked you to select 3 words that you would use to describe the experience that you're having right now. And you said exhilarating, fun, and worthwhile. So do you want to elaborate on those 3 words a little bit before we end today?
Exhilarating because, this is the first time in my life where, I really have a choice in how I'm going to be spending my days and what am I going to do. In addition to the work in the process management lab, I want to do more traveling. We're, starting to plan where we're going to be going. It's an exhilarating time. It's neat having this block of time and realizing that I'm the one responsible for filling it.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a lot of fun. In fact, I have more ability now to decide the things I'm going to do and the things I'm not going to do. And I do very few, if any, of the things that I really don't want to do and the things that aren't fun. And I'm able to mostly do things that are fun. Now, there are exceptions. I now have a Medicare card, having just turned 65.
Mm-hmm.
While you're an employee, the HR folks in your organization probably have processes in place to help you get different benefits. Once you retire and you're no longer part of the organization, you're kind of on your own navigating the bureaucracy. That wasn't fun, but it was necessary. And if you look at the total amount of time on those related non-fun activities to total time, it's minor. It's not worth worrying about. So, it's neat being able to spend time on the things that are fun with the people you want to play with. And the last word was what?
It was, just a second. The last word was, I would move down to the next piece. Just a second.
Worthwhile.
Worthwhile. Yep.
I like the idea of giving back, and I like the idea of helping others. And so this thing with the process management lab is about helping to grow the next generation of professionals who do the kind of work that we do. Mm-hmm. It's also about helping nonprofit organizations help their communities. And so realizing that we can do these things, for me is really important, because for me, this is an element of karmic payback. It's nice being in a position to help those who have helped me.
That is wonderful insight, and I want to thank you so much for that. And as we wrap up, would you please provide some sage advice for anyone who might be experiencing or about to be experiencing this particular phase in life?
Start engineering early.
Yeah.
You're not, odds are you probably know more or less when you want to be retiring.
Mhm,
And it's going to take some time to set things up.
mhm.
And so, we started our work in the process management lab a couple of years before I retired. That gave us a very long runway for putting things together, testing things out, trying, realizing that, some of the best times I've had over the last 2 years have been working in this lab, and I wanted to do more of it.
Okay.
So I think starting early would be my best bit of advice.
Okay. Well, on that note, and I want to just, embellish on that because there's so much talk about starting early. And when they're talking about, retiring, they're usually talking about the financial aspect of it.
Mhm.
So I think it's really beautiful that this conversation actually really didn't go too much. And I don't even know if we even touched on finances at all. So it's been such an enriching conversation and so different from the usual stuff because we know, yes, of course, you have to plan for retirement from a financial perspective. You got to save, start early, that. But I think it's really powerful to take the position that you're going to, and I love the word, that's going to be the word from the takeaway phrase from this interview is engineering, and start engineering early. And, yes, the savings part, everybody knows about that, but I love that the focus tonight was on something a little bit different. So I really appreciate your time. It's so good to see you again. I can't wait for another powwow with us. We're a little bit overdue. I'll reach out to you to see if we can, have another session. But Dr. Villachica, thank you so much. It's been lovely to speak with you.
You
And
too.
you have a wonderful weekend. And to everybody out there watching, thank you. See you next time and take care.
Bye-bye.